Now this video is all about masking fluid and how to use it. I'll show you how to apply it, the different effects you can get from it, and also how to remove it. Hello, my name is Paul Hopkinson. I'm an online art tutor for painting realistic wildlife, both animals and plants in watercolour. Oh, and don't click on that subscribe button down below and then that bell icon next to it. When you click on the bell icon, YouTube will let you know when I put a brand new video on here for you to watch. Now, what I'm going to do today is go through all these different tools you can use for masking fluid, and you can use even more than this for different ideas, designs and techniques, okay? So stay with me and I'll go through every one of these throughout this video. Now, with all masking fluid, there's a new one, look, that's the one I'm currently using. You tend to find, especially when it's a colour masking fluid, it's not mixed properly. It's quite blue at the bottom there, look. And because that's quite blue, you need to gently mix that in. And all I do is gently roll it like that. So we got to do, look, very simple. Just roll and roll, just like that, look. That's what you got to do. Or you can take the top off, reveal that masking fluid, and you can see quite blue and also quite stinky. It's a very latexy smell. I'll get an old brush like this one here and just gently, very gently just kind of mix it within the pot like that. That's what you got to do. And then pull it away. Don't shake it, because if you shake it, you get air bubbles inside. And when you try to come and use that, you finally end up with loads of air bubbles all over the painting. So just gently mix it before you start. But as I mentioned, there's other masking fluid types out there as well. Just remember to test it first on some scrap paper before you go to your main painting. One last thing to mention before we get stuck into this, okay, is that you've got to make sure that your masking fluid, if you've had it a while, doesn't go off, because they do go off. They've got a bit of a shelf life to them. Also, one last trick as well, when you use masking fluid, don't leave the lid off for a long period of time, because it will start to go off in there. It will start to harden as well and go all sticky. So what I do, get a plastic palette, I'm just going to stretch. An old one like this one here will do, and just pour a little bit into the palette before you start. And I'll show you what I mean very shortly. Now, one of my masking fluid tools is my old watercolour brushes. So when you look at all this lot here, these are my old detail brushes, my size 00s, which I use. So I don't throw them away, I save them for masking fluid specifically, because you find masking fluid will ruin a brush. Hang on a minute, I've got an odd black one there for some reason. So it will ruin a brush, and because it ruins a brush, you don't mind using the old ones for that reason. And I'll give you another tip later in this video on another reason why you want to save your old brushes, even when you've used it for masking fluid and it's caked in the stuff and you can't get it out. But keep it, I'll show you why. One little tip you can use is get an old bar soap like this one here, then just lightly drag it through, just a damp brush first though, not dry. Just get a little bit within the bristles there, and give it a twirl as you do so. And then you can just tap on some kitchen roll and load it with some masking fluid and then start applying the masking fluid. That will help preserve these bristles a little bit more. But to be honest with you, I always find eventually they go anyway. Now, one of the masking fluid tools I use within my arsenal of masking fluid tools tends to be not just that size 00 old brush, but also cocktail sticks. I'll show you what I mean. So if we just move the paints out of the way a minute and bring in the masking fluid, just there, look. What we'll do, we'll load the brush up and we'll start to apply this. I'm going to pull that, I'll put it over there, look, so you can see it even easier. We'll start to apply this, let's have a quick look. I'm going to go just inside the line first of all, but make sure you put it on fairly thickish, as you can see here, look. So fairly thick, right to the edge there. And just bring it down, just like that, to the edge where all the hairs come out. But you don't want to put too much on in one go. I'll show you what I mean. So then you get your cocktail stick and then flick out some fine hairs. You see the effect of this one out of the background very shortly. Overlapping, different angles, little crisscrosses all the way through, just whilst it's wet. Because you find masking fluid dries very, very quickly indeed. So you have to do a little area like that, come back in, and then apply some more. You'll also find masking fluid will tend to take off a lot of the pencil underneath. So it's well worth just kind of making notes where some of the marks are. So if you've got to reapply your little reference marks in pencil thereafter, you can do. So just worth bearing that in mind. Okay. Now you can see, because this is starting to dry, look how it's starting to cause like little ripples of balls of masking fluid there. So that's why you need to do this straight away when you start adding this outline on. And this is how I tend to work. If I'm working with a background for an animal that I'm painting, and you know, if it's a pale animal, very often I'll add a background to it. And by doing it this way around, also for birds or anything like that, it's ideal really for that. Then it's perfect for adding these little kind of fine lines just to the edge of the animal's face. In this case, this fox. Now I need this to dry, and it could be dry within probably about 10 minutes or so. And because of that, I can then start thinking about adding the background just around the outside edge of this for now, just to give it an idea how it looks, and then to remove the masking fluid thereafter. Oh, and also a little tip as well, don't dry it with a hairdryer. So don't get something like this and give it a dry, because when the masking fluid is wet, that will cause it sometimes to seep into the kind of texture of the paper. And if it seeps into the paper, you may find that when you try to remove the masking fluid later on, that it could tear that paper. Now, that's nice and dry, or is it? Basically what you find with masking fluid, if you never used it before, is that when it's dry, it's actually tacky. Do you hear that? So it's very tacky, but it doesn't come off on your finger. And you know then it's ready to kind of use and go over the top of. Now one thing I do like to use masking fluid for is wetting wet backgrounds. Because I can reserve the outline of an image, but also, once that's dry, I can then paint in the wet in wet coloured background with watercolours, just kind of make it stand out. Then once it's dry, obviously after that, you can gradually peel this off. I'll show you all about that right now. So as you know, masking fluid will preserve the white of the paper. Some masking fluids can tint the paper as well. Again, something you need to be wary of when you're working with masking fluid. Some do, some don't, and it all can also depend on the type of paper that you use. So try again before you go for the main painting. Just kind of test it out on some scrap paper first of all, before you actually make a start on the painting itself. Now don't click on like, share, subscribe and comment, as all these interactions encourage YouTube to show my content to even more people. And in turn this will allow my channel to grow, and then I'll be able to teach even more budding artists like yourself here on YouTube. I'm going to go straight in with some colour. Oh, look how bright that is. Lovely, lovely. I'm going to wet that down, and I'm going to apply this colour over the top of the edge, not all the way over, just the top of the edge of this masking fluid. Like so. A little bit of colour. Now check out the card to the top right hand side of the screen for painting watercolour backgrounds. Just to warm it slightly now, around the area. And to vary it in places, make it stronger and weaker in different places as well. Now I've left this for a good half an hour or so now, and it's dry. Now, removing the masking fluid, there are different ways of doing this. I tend to use a finger, okay? So a nice dry, clean finger on preferably some, clean kitchen roll, but there you go. And you can use a finger to remove it. I'll show you another method a bit later on as well for removing masking fluid. And if you roll the masking fluid in towards the subject when you're doing this, like so, then if the masking fluid does tear that paper, it will only tear towards the inside. And the inside of a fox, for example, we can cover that up with detail. But when you've got a nice kind of gentle wet in wet blended background like this one, you don't want that background being, marked in any way. You don't want the masking fluid to leave a long tear mark through it. As I say, you can easily disguise it when you're working within an animal. For example, I can see a little hint of blue in there as well. A bit more masking fluid in there as well. There you go. And all the way down, just to the nose. You can also see the way that the masking fluid, as I say, has left a little bit of a blue tint in this case. But also the way that the cocktail stick has pulled out these little fine lines. See that? All the way through. And that's the method we can use. Just get those really fine hairs by using masking fluid. So very handy technique to use by using the cocktail stick. As simple as that. I know. Now another tool that I use occasionally as well is one of these things. And all that is a silicone blending tool. It's the kind of thing that you'd use in pastel painting, pastel drawing, that kind of thing. And this one has got a point on one end and a chiseled edge on the other. So what I suggest you do have a look at this little part of the video and then you can decide if it's ideal for you, and I'll tell you all about using one of these silicone blending tools. When you load this with masking fluid and it dries, you can just literally just wipe it up afterwards. So it's not going to ruin the bristles on a brush or anything like that, but it's really useful to be able to do that with. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is add a little bit of masking fluid just to the inside edge of this branch. So again, let's go back to our masking fluid, which is that one there, look. Okay, and we can start adding this in using the silicone blending tool. There you go. And I'll just use the pointed end for now. And as before, we can add a background to the edge of this if need be. And you can see how easy it is to kind of apply this. It's a little bit less fluid than using a brush. But as I mentioned, it's so easy to clean, it really is. And if you wanted to, you can get some little fine lines. See that? So you can get some very fine lines with the tip of this as well. And they're not expensive to buy. They're quite cheap kind of brushes you can buy from art shops, or obviously online as well. So apply this on. You probably have to put it on a little bit thicker than you would do by using a cocktail stick or something like that. Now, one of the techniques I like to do, which is really good fun as well, if you haven't done it, try it, okay? This is splattering, and all it is, look, is an old brush like that. That's what I tend to use. And you load it with paint, probably tap it off a couple of times afterwards, and then holding your finger down, you let it go slowly over the paper, but you can direct it in different areas as well. So let me just show you what that's all about in this next video clip. What I can do now, just very lightly load this, just a little bit, like so, look. Okay, and I'm going to lightly flick just around this branch, and you see what I mean? When this is nice and dry, I'll show you what I can do by adding a bit of a background to it and create these little tiny dots of light showing through the background just by flicking it with an old brush like this. So a stiff bristle brush like this one, as you can see here, look, by doing that, that's all I'm doing, very gently, is ideal. There you go. Hey, there he goes, loads. And you can obviously do this with paint as well. There we go. Right, let this dry and I'll be back to you in a minute, and then we'll add a little bit of paint around the edge and see the kind of effects that we get. Okay, so we'll pop back to this one later on when we remove that masking fluid. So now I'm going to use that wetting wet technique we did with the fox earlier on. Then I'm going to let it dry and then we can finally remove the masking fluid. There's also one other item I've got here which I have been known to use on the odd occasion, okay? And this is one of the masking fluid removers. There's different names to these as well. One that I do know of is called Mask Away. So let me just demonstrate this for you and give you some idea how it works. It's like, I don't know what it's made of actually, it's like a rubbery kind of plasticky feel, it really is. I tend not to use them too often because I prefer to use my finger more than anything. But it's what this works for. You can just use it solely for removing the masking fluid. Remember, from the outside in, as I showed you using my finger. So if you don't want to get your fingers all kind of mucked up by using when you're removing the masking fluids, this is very sticky using this, then you can use one of these Mask Away sort of erasers. There are different names, as I mentioned, on the internet, so it's worth looking on the internet and find out what they are and see what other art shops supply. But it's just, to me, it's handy. It does work quite well, as you can see there. Look at that straight away. And then we can use the same method again, just to take off any of these kind of little splats which are made. Look at the effect we've got from that. That's lovely, isn't it? So that's what I mean just by doing that. And now that's all ready for me to apply all the detail to paint this branch. So that will give us some ideas on how to use masking fluid for a branch or around the outside of a branch to kind of add these tiny little kind of starburst dots in the background, which you very often see, as you know, on a summer's day. But also you can add that to the branch. So once you've got the background on and everything's nice and bone dry, all the masking fluid removed, you can reflick some masking fluid just solely for the background on the branch. So you can do it that way as well. And then you can simply paint your branch in, remove the masking fluid thereafter, and create those extra texture effects. Okay, that's one method. Now I know people have laughed at these before, okay, but I've made my own masking fluid tools, and these are very sticky, as you can see, And these are my own kind of handmade masking fluid applicators. All it simply is an old brush. So I think what I'll do, I'll go into a little video clip for you and show you how I put one of these together and also how they work. Look at these. I know, aren't these lovely? No. Okay. Old brushes which I've stabbed into my masking fluid pot. So all the basically done. Get an old brush a minute. I've got one ready to go for you. I've got something like this one here, look. So you load it with masking fluid like that and you stab it. Seriously. It's got to be a very old brush you're going to throw away again. Okay. And what that will do, as you roll it onto the paper, it'll create like a texture onto the paper eventually. So, I'll show you what I mean by getting one of these. If I load that, a little bit of paint, and tap it, I can use that to create texture onto the paper. See what I mean there? Just little bits of texture, and you can tap it, you can stab it, and this is really handy for painting things like rocks and very rough kind of ground, and that's what this one's for as well. So using an old brush for this. You know, when you go into these really cheap shops, I've gone to cheap shops and bought brushes like this on purpose for doing this sort of method with. And because it's so, well, different, nothing's the same, okay, as you can tell, it creates a lovely kind of textured background for when you add that paint over the top. So when I'm painting rocks like this one here, then you can work with that same method just solely for the rocks initially, probably less so, but a little bit on there to kind of create that texture to reserve the white of the paper before you actually start adding the colour over the top. Now there's many ways of getting those fine lines with masking fluid. You can use a size 00 brush. You can use a cocktail stick if you want to kind of draw those very fine hairs on the edge of a fox or the feathers on a bird. We can also use what's called a ruling pen, and it's one of these little gadgets here. So I'll just show you in the next part of the video on the way I tend to use this. But the good thing about a ruling pen is that you can use this little twiddly dial on the top there to widen. So again, wider there, or make it a little bit smaller in size. There you go, something like that. And that will allow different amounts of masking fluid to pour through. They can start to add the fine lines. And I do like to use this for probably something like whiskers, fine hairs on animals in general. So I've used it for that. Again, like we did with the fox earlier on, to get those little extra details in the background. So another method you can use is by using one of these ruling pens. It's an old architect's pen, isn't it? Something like that, which you can use. Now you have to bear in mind when you're doing this is that sometimes you end up pulling the blades off that are already there. That's better, look. So practice this first of all before you ever go on the main painting to give us some ideas how to create grass by using a ruling pen. But then again, you could always go back in again with a cocktail stick and add some even finer lines by using that as well. Just by loading it and just adding those into the details. Now this will reserve the white of the paper again, so when we add the colour over the top and remove this afterwards, you find you've got all these lovely kind of lines and marks in there, which then you can add even more detail with watercolour over the top of those. Now I know I mentioned splattering before by using an old brush and just pulling up the tip of the brush after loading it with paint. There's another way which you can use as well, and that is the old good old toothbrush. That's all it is, and it is the old good old toothbrush. Because don't use your current one you got in the bathroom cabinet. Use this one, use an old one. Don't throw it in the bin, just save one. Because you can lightly load this with masking fluid and then lightly splatter that across the surface of the paper. Okay, you've got to cover up certain areas of the paper with scrap pieces of paper as well. So I'll just show you how I use it. You can load the toothbrush up like so, just a little bit on the tip like that. So it's actually quite fine using the toothbrush, it really is. And I like that for those really fine splatter marks. You know, if you're painting like, I don't know, like a shingle on the beach or a footpath or something like that. Now I mentioned about the rocks as well. So as I said, I use the ruling pen and the cocktail stick and the splattering technique to create all these effects on here. Now I've not removed the masking fluid yet. So let's just take that off. So I'm going to use a dry finger again. Look at this. Ooh, look at that. Lovely. And the effects that you get just by thinking beforehand, a bit of pre-planning before you do this, obviously. Let's move that rock there, look. Now when you remove that masking fluid, obviously you've got the white of the paper, which is brilliant. It's exactly what we're looking for. But it can be too white, can't it? It really can. So I tend to add a little hint of colour in places, just kind of break up that whiteness. But by adding some pale colours, especially with grass blades, I'll show you that one next, then that'll kind of bring it to life that little bit more as well. So let's go into that video. So remove the masking fluid, just brush it away. Try not to make a mess in your room though, if you can help it. And you can see how that's reserved the white of the paper for those areas there. Then all I need to do is get my detail brush again and then start to paint in some more details over the top to sort of blend them in. Or you could just simply tint them in with a little bit of colour because you've reserved the white of the paper. There you go, a little bit of colour over the top. Let's go for some really bright green in there as well, just in places. And you can see the effect that you can get. Let's just vary with a little bit of burnt sienna. And then we can simply paint in another rock, which I've reserved the white of the paper for, down the bottom. I do like this effect. It works really, really well, as you can see. Just by, using a variety of tools to reserve the white of the paper. And there you go. Okay, so now that I've introduced you to a variety of tools for applying the masking fluid, I'm going to show you some actual examples where I've used masking fluid within my wildlife paintings. Now working on these dandelion seed heads, I'm going to add some water droplets, but to do that I'm going to reserve the white of the paper using masking fluid. Okay, so then once the painting is done, I can just add those little water droplets right at the very end of the main tutorial. Then when you've got all these on, all you need to then do, I'm going to carry on in a minute to a little bit of music, but just put some little tiny taps here and there as well, little circles, little taps. If you just tap it too much, you probably end up with a line. You want little tiny circles. So little dots like that, and some larger than others. Not too many, we're not going to go mad with this. But every now and then, just put a little one there, a bit larger. There's one that should be there anyway, I think. Make them nice and round. And also when you come around the side of the seed head here, you can just see some very tiny ones, just making a little appearance here and there. Now let's quickly return back to that dandelion seed head where I can remove the masking fluid to reveal the white of the paper, ready for when I add the watercolour droplets. Just remember to remove that natural oil off your fingertip before you make a start. And then very lightly start to gently rub the surface of your watercolour paper. Make sure everything's nice and dry underneath, by the way, first. And this will reveal the white of the paper that we reserved earlier on, right at the very beginning. Love it, absolutely love it. And we've got to make sure that there's no extra little bits in there. So very light, the same finger. Rub over, see there's one there. Add a little bit more there. Just feel it. You feel the bump as you go over, just very gently. And I think with that there, that should do. Now here's another video clip using different masking fluid techniques, and this time what we're going to do is just show you the finishing off of removing the masking fluid for painting a bird's nest. Very interesting as well. So if you use a bit of a burnt umber, the burnt umber lamp black mix, a little bit of the burnt sienna, and you can add some little details in there over the top of the damp paper. Yeah, it's still damp at this stage, but I don't care, that's fine. Once it's dry, remove the masking fluid and do this very lightly with a clean finger, okay, by rolling it off, and then we can start adding some more details over the top. There's a short video from one of my main videos on my website using the same technique, but in this case I'm actually painting feathers instead of fur. So all the way down, you can see, by the way, when I just do this side here, look, now you can see the benefit by using the cocktail stick and the overall effect that you get with the feathers on the back of the head there. Do you see what I mean? So I mean that's ideal as well if you're working on a cat portrait or a dog portrait, anything with fur or feathers, then it's really good little technique. Kind of pull out a few little lines. Just very lightly brush these off. Okay, just about it. Put them to one side, not on the floor. Okay, Paul, thank you very much. And just go over with your dry finger again. Make sure there's no oil or grease on your fingers. Just make sure there's no residual masking fluid on there. You should be able to see it. But I think we're just about there. Now, this is one of the later kind of editions where I just fill in the white of the paper, which has been reserved by masking fluid, of course, just so I can fill in the detail for that last little droplet coming off the tip of the beak. Just very lightly touching the paper down to about 3/4 of the way down, and then you've got a bit of a pale area down there where the reflection is to the water. Even a little tiny touch around there as well. So just to recap, when you apply the masking fluid, as you know, you can use a blender brush, you can use a cocktail stick, you can use an old 00 sized brush, but do this very finely. Try not to overload that brush too much. Obviously depending on what you're using to apply the masking fluid with. And then you've got to think about any finer lines you want to put in there, so then you can use the cocktail stick again and just load that up carefully and add those little fine lines and details in. Remembering that when you remove the masking fluid, do so with a very, very clean finger. Don't pull it, just remember to roll it from the outside in towards the subject. So don't pull the masking fluid, just remember to roll it gently using the tip of a dry finger, just to carefully remove it from the paper. Now let me know in the comments down below if you've got any ideas of your own on how to apply masking fluid, because I'm always interested in new ideas and new ways of doing things. Now don't forget to look in the description down below for the materials that I use for my watercolour paintings. And there's also some freebies there for you to have a go at, as well as in video tutorials, just for you to get your brushes wet for. Now check out my next video, and that's going to show you how I use masking fluid to protect a woodpecker chick as it emerges from a hole in a tree. See you there.